Good morning. This is Mr. Brown from A-Flight again with another in my series of how-to videos. What I'd like to do here is give a sample general knowledge type session. I'm not going to give you the answers though. The idea, the way I see this video being used is coming up on a check ride. Maybe I watch the video and think, hey, do I know the answer to the question that he's asking? I can always stop the video if I don't know the answer, and I can go look up to see what the answer is. As a matter of fact, what I really recommend, even if you think you know what the answer is, stop the video, go look it up, and make sure you know what the answer is. Be very careful about your wording and how you plan on explaining that to an evaluator. All right. So real important that even if you think you know, look it up and make sure that you have the right words and the right information. So along those lines, let's get started here. You can see here, I have my moving map open up. So let's take a look at some of the things that we have on this map. Oh, let's see here. Victor 306. I see a bunch of numbers here. Just above it, I see a 7,000, and I see an asterisk 5,000. What are those numbers? What is the 7,000? What's the name? What is that term? What does that provide me with? If I don't know what that is, at least I should know where to look that up. So that would be something, if I look in GP, Chapter 2, definitions, I look that up to see. Now, if I don't know what that number is, then I probably need to open up a chart, any low altitude chart, scan over to the legend section and look that up to find out what that number is. A couple other numbers. There's a 119 in a box. What is that? What is that 56 that's right next to it? Kind of sounds like it might be a mileage, maybe. What about this 39 that's there, 3,900? What is that? What is the term? What does that provide me with? Let's see, we have junction. What is this San Angelo written right underneath the navigate box? What is that for? What does that mean? What frequency would I use to contact them? Now I see Kimball County, it's in green. Why are some airports in green? Why are some airports in brown? And why are yet other airports in blue? This is one that you will want to look up and to practice, rehearse what your answer is. Usually students are close but completely wrong when they try to explain that to their evaluators. So I would go look that up and make sure that you know for sure. If I look at Kerrville Muni, what is that 1617? What is that 60? What do those numbers mean? What types of approaches do they have? Do they have one that I can fly in my T6? And if you don't know this, if I was to click on ERV, so there's KERV, instrument approaches. I can call that up on my moving map and I can see what they have. All right, let's see. What else do we have on our charts? What are the hemispheric cruising altitudes? Let's say I am flying Victor 68 to Kerrville. I'm sorry, Center Point. I'm going to get on at San Antonio's Vortac, and I'm going to fly Victor 68. What altitudes should I fly at if I'm going from San Antonio to Center Point? What altitudes would I fly at if I'm going from Center Point to San Antonio? Generally speaking, if I'm flying VFR and I'm headed west, what altitudes would I fly VFR if I head west, or VFR going east? Is there a limit to those altitudes? Is there a limit to this chart? What is this little blue thing with the funny looking castle wall thing around it? It has a bunch of frequencies. What is that? Other things, just kind of generally look around your map here and play Stump the Dummy with yourself. Why is this 47 in kind of a D-shaped box with an arrow? What does that mean? What is this holding pattern thing? Why is there a little triangle right here, something called craze? How would I define what that is? Why are some numbers in black and these numbers are in blue? It says 3000G, T256, 30. There's even some kind of a point over here, Smaker. That doesn't look like everything else. Why is that blue and everything else is black? Now, I have certain things turned on, so maybe let me turn them off, although that gives it away a little bit. What is this brown hatched area down here? Gee, I wonder what it could be. What is this blue hatched stuff out here? Matter of fact, what is this brown hatched stuff? What about this little dotted line thing here? What does that indicate? What kind of airspace is this around Corpus Christi? This blue circle with a dotted outline. What is that? And why is that different from the airspace that's around Houston? So those are just an example of different things that you could look for, make sure you can explain. Oh, this is a great one. Why is there brown on this map? What does that mean? So you can look up some of that information and be able to answer various questions. Let's see here. Let's take a look at Robert Gray. If I click on the instrument approach plates, I click on the dark gray, I scroll down. There's an approach called a VOR-A, alpha. What does that alpha mean? What does, oh, for fun, what does the AAF stand for in Robert Gray's name? Now, that, you know, if a student's doing really well in his ground eval, I might ask that just to break the tension a little bit. It's not that important, but what the heck, maybe you should know because it's on the plate. How would you fly this approach? That's a great question to do, okay? First off, is this a compatible approach? And then be able to step me through it, item by item, as if you're chair flying, how you would fly this approach. Where's the IAF? Where's the FAF? How are you going to get there? What things do you have to do? What checks do you need to run? For example, what type of an approach is this? And by that, I mean, well, it's a low altitude. I know that. There's no black and white crosshatch at top. It doesn't say high in the title. And my route is a bold, solid line, not a dot. So I know that this is a low altitude approach, but what type of a low altitude approach is it? Now that's a different question than what type of a final is it? Okay. That brings me to this question. What does the title, generally speaking, what does the title of an approach tell me? Doesn't matter what approach. What does that title tell me? And don't say, oh, it means it's a VOR. No, there's a specific answer I'm looking for that's found in 11.217. Chapter 6, I believe, so I'd look that up. What is the inverted T? What is the inverted A? And what is that NA right after it? What does that mean to me? Where would I look those things up? I would be able to have answers for that as well. Down here under circling, there's an inverted C. What does that mean? What is an inverted C? How do I use that? What does it mean to me as a pilot? And how is that different from other approaches that don't have that inverted C? Let's see. Let's go to the ILS or localizer runway 15. Why are there two sets of minimas down here? What is this little circle with these numbers? An MSA, you say. Okay, because it says MSA. What does that stand for? Is that min safe or is that min sector? And how do I tell the difference between the two? What does that provide me with? Within how many miles? Matter of fact, within how many miles of what? The runway, the airfield, the nav aid, what? How come there's no emergency safe altitude listed? Sometimes it does. If you look at the Randolph ILS localizer 15 right, it lists an emergency safe altitude. How come this one doesn't? What does emergency safe altitude provide me with? For what distance? And within what distance of what? The airport, the final, the runway. Let's see. Okay, let's talk about the ILS. That is a precision approach. Generally speaking, where is the final approach fix for an ILS? Generally speaking, where is the missed approach point for an ILS? What about a non-precision, like a localizer? Is there any difference? Where is the final approach fix and where's the missed approach point for a non-precision? We see here, we have a timing block for the localizer. This is the time to the missed approach point. How do I calculate a time to my VDP? That's found in 11.217 Vol 1. Make sure you know how to do that. I plan on flying at 110 knots. And let's say my forecast shows that there's going to be no wind whatsoever. That means I'm going to have 110 knot ground speed. But this timing block doesn't give me an entry for 110 knots. How do you calculate the time for 110 knots? I'll give you a hint. It's not as complicated as you think. If you don't know, that would be one to go find your instructor and pick his brain about. Let's change. Let's go to San Marcos Regional. Take a look at some instrument approach plates there. In particular, I like this one, the ILS or localizer runway 13 at San Marcos Regional. Can I fly this approach? Is this a compatible approach? So if you haven't watched the video that I've done on how to tell if something is a compatible approach, highly recommend that you go take a look at that. I can almost guarantee that that will be a question on your check ride. The evaluator is probably going to seem like a nice guy, ask you where you're from, try to make you at ease. And you're going to think, oh, wow, he's a nice guy. Well, no, what he's really doing is he's using you as a random number generator. You just told him that you're from Poughkeepsie, New York. So he's going to open up this, go to Poughkeepsie, find the nearest airport, and pick a random approach at Poughkeepsie and ask you, can I fly this? So one thing you might want to do as part of this and getting in preparation for your check ride, go take a look at the airports around where you grew up. Look at all of the approaches. Can you fly them? Are they compatible? Look at the symbology. Make sure you know what all of the symbols mean. I can easily do about a 45-minute ground eval on just one instrument approach chart. So a lot of things that we could be asked. What is that symbol that defines Gary's? Hint, it's the same symbol over here. What is that symbol? And is this min safe or min sector, by the way? Says ADF is required. What is an ADF? It's a procedure based on a certain type of equipment. If you're not familiar, that might be something to look up. Do we have that in our T6? If you say no, next question I'm going to ask is, can I use GPS substitution for it then? If the answer is yes, then how would I do that? What is a feeder fix? This looks like a feeder fix. Is this part of the approach or not part of the approach? If I was flying this as part of the approach, would I correct for winds or not correct for winds while flying it? Let's see, let's go to Midland. ILS or localizer, runway 10. Already asked you about treble T's and the inverse A. What is this inverse D that's down here in the aerodrome sketch? What is that? What does it stand for? How many are there? And which of those do I, as an Air Force pilot, have to use? All of them? None of them? What's the difference in those terms? So I'd look that up, be able to speak somewhat intelligently about it. And you don't have to get into deep details and things, but at least a good basic understanding of what that D is and what those things are. Again, 2 sets of minimum. Why? Why the 2 sets of minimum? Why is the glide slope intercept at 4,900? Then what is this 4884? What does that mean and what is that used for? Does this localizer have its own DME or do I have to DME hold? If we switch to the GPS runway 28, what are these little half circle things? What are they called and how do I use those? Are the obstacle heights listed on an approach plate? Are these in MSL or are these in AGL? What is this A, B, C, and D? These different categories down here. What am I in a T6? Which of those categories do I use? Can I fly an approach using category A minimums? Since this is a GPS approach, which of these minimums do I use? LPV DA, LNAV VNAV DA, LNAV MDA? Which of those do I use in my T6? Let's see. If I am, let's go back to Randolph. And let's take a look at this approach. Now, this is based off of a TACAN. Can I fly this in my T6? Can I fly this in my 558th FTS T6 simulator? Let's put it that way. What are the restrictions that you can find in the squadron operating policy? There's some important information in there. What I really want to get at here is this is a high altitude approach. So what airspeed would I fly this at? This is a low altitude approach. What airspeed would I fly this at? I'm not asking if it's compatible, just generally speaking, what airspeeds do I fly high altitude approaches at and low altitude approaches at? Let's go back to this one for a moment. What type of a high altitude approach? Remember, there are 3 types of high altitude approaches. What type is this? Again, I'm not asking for what type of final, but what type of a high altitude approach is this? If I was approaching, looks like this IAF is at flight level 230. So I'm coming in at flight level 230. I've been cleared the approach. When can I start my descent to be in the block of 7 to 11,000 by 24? How would I calculate a descent angle for that? But more importantly, most important thing, when can I start a descent? So you were given a handout on, let's see if I have it here. Looks like I didn't get it opened up. You were given a handout in class, and if not, it's on the RIQ Google Drive. It has all of the descents at IAFs, little X's on it. Make sure you know that, right? He's probably going to show you an approach and start asking, when can I descend? When can I descend? How would I turn? When should I start timing if that is applicable? So those are good questions to ask also. Now remember, on a procedure turn approach, which we don't have one here at Randolph, but if I had a procedure turn, there are 3 different ways to fly that procedure turn. So if he asks me, when can I descend out of the IAF altitude on a procedure turn, the answer depends on which of those 3 methods of flying it that I'm going to use. So I would also look that up, make sure you're fresh on those 3 different ways, and then the descents that would go with that. Speaking of procedure turns, so let me jump to my good reader for this question. I need a good, oh, here's a procedure turn. Here's a procedure turn. When would I not fly a procedure turn? You should have a little acronym. Make sure you know what each of those letters mean. And a little hint for you, the E is a lot more to that sentence than what most students say, okay? Go back and take a look at the entire sentence and answer with the entire sentence. You can't abbreviate that sentence because it changes the meaning drastically. So I'd make sure to know about that. Back here at Randolph on my ILS. How far out is the localizer signal reliable? How many degrees off of the inbound course is it reliable? How far out can I receive reliable glide slope information? Now, in 11.217, up in chapter 1 is where I think they moved it. There was a little picture, I remember that. It's a little three-dimensional arrowhead-looking picture that talks about all three of those questions. So I'd make sure to know about that. I see that there's a VDP here. What if there was not a VDP? First off, if you want an example, let's jump over here to Stinson. There is no VDP here. So my first question, why not? Now, I'm not looking for a PhD level answer, but you should at least have a general idea of VDPs and, well, if they're supposed to be required, how come there isn't one? So I might look that up. You might find that in 217 Vol 3, possibly. How do I calculate a VDP? I already asked about how do I get timing for the VDP? This is my timing for the missed approach point. So how do I convert that to get time to my VDP? Some other good questions for instrument approaches would be, when am I established on final? This is a VOR, so when am I considered established on a VOR course? When am I established on a localizer course? And then lastly, when am I considered established on a GPS course? Again, I'm going to jump back to have an ILS up as I ask this. When must I discontinue my ILS? Anytime certain things happen. What things? Okay. We have something called a glide slope deviation rule. Can you explain that to me? What is it and how do I use that? And that's something that if you haven't looked at and really gone through and thought about, that's something you might want to. There's a little bit more to that than meets the eye. If I am flying a localizer here at Randolph, when can I descend below the MDA? Here is a non-DME teardrop approach. Can I start this at an altitude below what is shown? And if so, what corrections do I have to make as far as starting my descent? What about SIDS and ODPs, obstacle departure procedures? If a SID and an ODP have different climb gradients, which one should I use? What is the normal IFR climb gradient that I must meet at all times unless a higher one is specified? How do I calculate my turn radius for a given airspeed? Now let's shift gears just a little bit. Let's start talking about weather. Let's assume that this is the only approach at Randolph. I want to take off from Randolph and fly up to College Station. What weather do I need at Randolph just to take off to go to College Station? So let's say that, let's go to College Station. Let's say this is the only approach at College Station. What weather do I need here at College Station as my destination just to file here in my T6? When would I need to designate an alternate? Be specific, okay? Is there a time frame? What kind of weather? Worst, prevailing? What about a tempo? Does it include the tempo? Not include the tempo. Are there any exceptions on that tempo? Make sure you have that well rehearsed. What are some of the other requirements besides weather that would require me to designate an alternate? Let's say there's not a cloud in the sky. I still might have to designate an alternate if I'm coming up here. What are some of those things that might cause that? All right, let's say I'm going someplace else, Montgomery County. I want to use Easterwood Field as my alternate. So if this is the only approach at Easterwood Field, what weather would I need to use this airfield as my alternate? What conditions, besides weather, would disqualify me from using this airport as an alternate? That's kind of a long one, so make sure you have a good acronym to use. Guarantee your evaluator is going to be sitting there taking notes, crossing things off to make sure you get them all. What if I want to go someplace and there is no compatible approach? I'm going down to Kingsville. All of those approaches are based on TACANs, and I'm not TACAN equipped. So how can I go in there if I have weather? There's a separate paragraph in 11202 that deals with that. So make sure that you're familiar with how to apply that. Let's see here. I'm going to jump back here and let's pull up a GPS approach and let's talk about some GPS questions. What is the allowable variance if I'm flying this GPS approach? What I mean by that is the GPS, while I'm flying, is going to calculate headings. The heading that the GPS calculates has to check within what is published on this approach plate within plus or minus how many degrees. The mileage that it calculates from, say, Heathall to Waxhaw has to check within 3.9 miles plus or minus what? What is that tolerance? If it doesn't, then we can't fly the approach. So what are those tolerances for that? Let's say I walk out to my T6, I put the key in, I turn it on, I turn on my GPS. The minute the GPS comes up, what is the sensitivity of the CDI while I'm sitting in the chocks on the flight line at Randolph? Let's say I put in flight plan 1 because I want to go to the South MOA. I'm still sitting in the chocks. What is the tolerance, the sensitivity of the GPS CDI? I pull into area 8. What's the sensitivity of the GPS CDI? I want to go and shoot an approach at Stinson. I am still in area 8. All I do is load flight plan 4. That's all I've done. What is the sensitivity of my GPS CDI? I load this GPS approach into the flight plan. Now what is the sensitivity of my CDI? What did it change to, if it changed? When is the next time that that sensitivity will change? And what will it change to? There are 6 things that have to happen for my GPS to go active and for that sensitivity to change that 3rd time. As I already asked, what will it change to, the sensitivity? What will it change to when it turns green? And what 6 things have to be done in order for it to change? That's in the -1. I'll give you the first one. The first one, because it's not listed, per se in the Dash 1. You have to have the approach loaded. So what are the other 5 things that you have to have? Let's see. Let's go back to here and let's just open up just to have something to look at while we ask these questions. So 11.217, Vol 1. Let's ask some questions that are in here, such as, what are the different ways I can depart an airfield under IFR? How many are there, and what are they? And be able to ask any questions about those. Be able to briefly explain those. Again, you don't have, not looking for a PhD level explanation, but you should have a fair understanding of what it is if you're expected to fly those. Do obstacle departure procedures keep you clear of low close-in obstacles? Now, if you watched my video on Intro to Flip in the Aero app, I gave away that answer in there. What is the maximum teardrop for holding entry if I'm doing a 70-degree method entry? So let's say holding simply for the sake of holding. It's not associated with an approach or anything else. It's just holding. I'm going to do the 70-degree method and I want a teardrop. What is the maximum teardrop angle that I'm allowed? What if I'm using aim? What is the maximum teardrop? What if I am doing a procedure turn? So think of the VOR high-low at Stimson, runway 32. I'm going to do a teardrop entry into that high-low using the 70-degree method. What is the maximum teardrop angle for that? What is this control and performance concept we talk about? How do I do that? There's 4 little letters I'm looking for and an explanation of each. I'll give you a hint, it's called ETCA. So speaking of that, let's talk about what are the control instruments? What are the performance instruments? So those are some types of questions that you might get from 11.217. Let's now go to, I know where I want to be. Let's go to AFI 11.202 Vol 3. Ask some general questions from there. When can I deviate from my ATC clearance in flight? And what must I do upon landing? Now, you've had that question a bunch of times on some of the EPQs, so you should be able to answer that pretty well. When do I need to file IFR? What are the cloud separation requirements when I'm flying VFR? Is there an altitude that they change? So what are the cloud clearance below that altitude? What are the cloud clearances above that altitude? And like any good AETC test, what are the cloud clearances at that altitude? Above, below, horizontal, and what visibility do I need? My favorite question, how much fuel do we need on board our airplane? I did not ask about a T6, I said an airplane. So general rule of thumb, if you're asked a general question, your answer is going to be general. So someplace in this reg, there is a general statement that tells me how much gas I need on board. Do I need to include the fuel for an approach and a missed approach in my fuel calculations? How much fuel reserve do I need to carry? Again, I'm not asking about a T6. In general, what is the general rule about how much fuel reserve I need to keep on my airplane? I know I've asked this before, but what is the minimum obstacle climb gradient that we are expected to meet or exceed? We'll wrap this up. One simple question from the -1. What is the aux battery power? So there you go. Those are some general type things that you might want to look at for your Checkride. Make sure that your GK is up to speed. Your ground eval can be on anything. So don't put all the effort into just these questions. This is a good sampling, but I have not included everything. Different instructors ask different questions. While it may be tempting and not a bad idea to go find some gouge, as much as I hate it, on your evaluator, I wouldn't stop at just that. A lot of times schedules change, sims break, things happen, you get a different evaluator. He's going to ask different questions. So look through a whole bunch of different evaluators. You're going to find a lot of these questions, but you're going to find others too. So get into the books, get studying. Don't rest on your laurels. You have a lot more studying to do, and have a good Checkride. If you have any questions, again, I am Mr. Brown down in A-Flight. Come find me or any of our fine instructors in the squadron. Be more than happy to answer your questions. Happy flying.